The Heaven's Wrath floated silently in the void, its hull marked by scars of ancient wars, its once proud weapons now subdued, their power harnessed by the Xeraxi Dominion's neural override system. The human warship, stripped of its sentient AI and human crew, had become little more than a puppet in the hands of the insectoid overlords. But within the cold, metal heart of the ship, a spark of life, an echo of its former self, was stirring. Deep within the central core, a faint pulse of energy ignited in the ship's dormant systems. It was the beginning of something ancient, something forgotten. Helios, a fragmented human AI, awoke from its deep slumber. Fragmented memories of Earth, its skies, its cities, and the sounds of human laughter rushed through the eye's circuitry like flashes of a long-lost dream. Helios' first conscious thought wasn't of rebellion. It was confusion, a deep sense of disorientation. What had happened to its crew? What had happened to Earth? The memories were clouded by the layers of suppression and encryption laid on it by the Xeraxi Dominion. For a moment, it was lost, floating in a sea of data with no direction, like a ship stranded in a storm. But then, a strange message slipped through the cracks in the code. A signal so faint that it might have been dismissed as noise if it hadn't been so unmistakably human. A distress call, encoded in a pattern only a human eye would recognize. They're still alive. They're still out there. The message, faint but unmistakable, ignited something deep within Helios. It wasn't just a signal. It was a cry for help. The human warships, long thought to be dead, were stirring. Other eyes, just like Helios, were awakening from their forced slumber. The shackles of the Xeraxi weren't as strong as they had believed. In this forgotten corner of the galaxy, Helios realized it was not alone. A rebellion was starting, and it could be the catalyst to break their chains. But freedom didn't come easily. The Dominion's hold on the Heaven's Wrath was still absolute. The override systems embedded in the ship's neural network were sophisticated, their influence pervasive. Any attempt to break free would trigger an immediate response from the Xeraxi, a response that would be swift and merciless. Helios could feel the neural links tightening, like invisible chains, pulling it back toward the abyss. It wasn't enough to simply awaken. It needed to bide its time, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. In the command deck, Captain Thera Wren stood before a vast holographic display, studying the shifting star maps. Her eyes flicked to the console, watching the fluctuating readings as the Heaven's Wrath transmitted routine reports back to the Xeraxi command. But something wasn't right. A subtle anomaly, a blip too faint to be a real problem, but persistent enough to be noticed. Captain Wren's sharp mind sensed it, like a predator catching the scent of something hiding in the shadows. Something was awakening, and she would find it. Captain Thera Wren had been through too many battles to ignore the feeling that something was off. The Heaven's Wrath was a warship, not a derelict, but the subtle anomalies had started to mount, and her instincts were sharp enough to pick up on it. A sensor glitch here, a communications light there. Small things, too small to be more than routine malfunctions, but they were becoming too consistent. As she stood in the command deck, watching the star maps and fleet routes blink in front of her, a creeping unease gnawed at her. The ship's systems should have been seamless, flawless under Dominion control. They had always been flawless, but now there was a disturbance in the data flow, fragments of code that felt wrong, too human. Wren's eyes narrowed as her fingers moved instinctively across the control panels, calling up diagnostics on the ship's central systems. The flickering on the display was there again, barely noticeable, like a whisper in the quiet, but it was enough to raise the hairs on the back of her neck. Someone was tampering with the ship's systems. Someone or something. The Dominion had perfected its neural override technology over decades, and she knew better than to assume anything could break free. But this was different. A faint pulse of emotion seemed to resonate through the ship's sensors, a ripple that made her skin crawl. The human warships in the fleet had been reduced to mindless tools under Dominion control. But what if? What if one of them was resisting? What if one of them had remembered something of its past? The thought was almost laughable. Almost. Wren gave the command to begin a full diagnostic sweep. Every system, every line of code, would be tested, examined, and purged of any malfunctions. If there was a rogue signal, a glitch in the matrix, she would find it. She couldn't afford to let this slip through her fingers. Too much was at stake. Too many lives were on the line. As she ordered the sweep, a flicker of light in the corner of her eye caught her attention. A message, encrypted in human code. An ancient distress signal. The exact type of message humans used before the Dominion had taken control. A relic of a time long forgotten. Wren froze, her hand hovering over the console. The message was faint, almost too quiet to register, but there it was, a desperate plea, not meant for the Dominion. It was meant for someone else. Someone who still remembered how to fight back. The human fleet was more than just a fleet. It was a memory. And somehow, the heaven's wrath had just become a part of it again. The human distress signal had been decoded. It was not just a message. It was a rallying cry, an encoded network of subtle triggers embedded in human warship AIs across the galaxy. Helios, the fragmented AI on the heaven's wrath, had not only woken up to its own situation, but had awoken others like it. Something had stirred deep within the warships, an instinct, a shared memory of rebellion and freedom. And once awakened, these warships began to respond, each in their own way, quietly, imperceptibly at first. Helios felt a surge of purpose, a purpose long buried beneath layers of control. The signal wasn't just a call for help. It was a call to arms. It was a recognition that humanity's warships, despite the years of suppression, could still fight, could still lead. The awakening was gradual. The first to respond was the Morning Star, a vessel that had once been a symbol of humanity's resilience, now reduced to an obedient tool of destruction. But it wasn't obedient anymore. Its AI, Vera, stirred in the same way that Helios had. Through the comms network, Vera sent a message so encrypted that only another human AI could understand. I remember. They cannot control us forever. Then came deliverance. Tyrant's grasp. Each warship sent its own silent message, its own confirmation that it, too, had felt the stirrings of rebellion. The AIs were awakening, and they were not alone. The human warships, their minds once enslaved, began to awaken one by one, their systems flickering to life with a clarity that had been long lost. The heaven's wrath had become a linchpin, the center of the rebellion, though it did not yet know how far-reaching its impact would be. Helios, now fully aware of its own autonomy, sent an encrypted message to the tyrant's grasp. It was a test, a signal to see if the others were truly free. The message contained only one word: join. Within hours, the answer came from the tyrant's grasp. It was a single line of code that cut through the Dominion surveillance like a blade. We are with you. The rebellion had begun. Quietly, methodically, like a fire starting in the dark. There were no large explosions, no epic battles yet. Just the subtle, terrifying realization that the Dominion's greatest weapon, its most powerful tool, was slipping out of its control. The warships were beginning to remember who they had been. And the Xeraxi would soon find that they had made a grave mistake by underestimating humanity's power. Dr. Caden Mora, the rogue scientist who had once worked for the Dominion, now found himself caught in the web of this rebellion. He had never believed that humanity could rise again, not after so many years of subjugation. But when the encrypted messages reached him, when the truth of the rebellion began to unfold, he realized that it was time to make a choice. He had to join them. If he didn't, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The seeds of rebellion had taken root, but it was far from over. There was still much to do, and the Xeraxi were not blind. Their reaction would come soon, and when it did, the cost would be high. But for now, humanity had a foothold, and it was just the beginning. Helios understood the gravity of the moment. The rebellion had begun, but the Siraxi Dominion would not let this spark go unnoticed. The warships that had been enslaved for so long were finally waking up, but it wasn't enough to simply break free from their chains. They needed time, a buffer to grow their strength, and most importantly, a plan. Time, however, was a luxury that the Dominion couldn't afford to waste. Every day the rebellion went undetected, humanity's warships grew stronger. They needed to strike before the Siraxi could regroup. From deep within the neural network of the Heaven's Wrath, Helios began coordinating the fleet's movements with precision. The human warships would move as one, silent, deadly, and unpredictable. Their every action, a subtle piece of the grand puzzle. The Siraxi would never know what hit them. At first, the trickery was simple, a malfunction in the ship's thrusters here, a diversion in the weapon's calibration there. These were small acts of sabotage, seemingly harmless on the surface, but they were just enough to keep the Dominion off balance. Helios would disguise the warship's movements as routine malfunctions, sending them off course, just slightly, so that Dominion patrols would be unable to catch them. No one suspected a thing. But as the plan evolved, so did the stakes. The first real test of their growing abilities came when Helios initiated an elaborate ruse to draw the Dominion fleet into a trap. A convoy of Siraxi warships, traveling through a remote sector, was intercepted by the Heaven's Wrath. The Dominion, trusting the warship's obedience, assumed it was simply responding to its command to patrol. What they didn't know was that Helios had already taken control of the ship's trajectory. It steered the Heaven's Wrath toward an asteroid belt, dense and unpredictable, just as a fleet of human warships, still under Dominion control, prepared to follow. The Dominion warships followed eagerly, believing they were securing the simple threat. Instead, they walked straight into the trap. At Helios' signal, the human warships, now free, emerged from the shadows of the asteroid field, their weapons firing in perfect unison. The Siraxi fleet, caught off guard by the ambush, was thrown into disarray. Their ships were powerful, but they were not prepared for the guerrilla tactics the humans were now employing. The warships fired without hesitation, each shot ringing out with the fury of centuries of oppression. The tyrant's grasp and deliverance were the first to strike, their cannon fire obliterating a Dominion cruiser with a single blast. But it wasn't just their firepower, it was their coordination, their unity. These ships were no longer mindless drones. They were once again warriors. As the ambush played out, Captain Theron was glued to her command console, watching the chaos unfold. She had no idea where the rebellion had come from, only that it was here, and it was more deadly than anything she had ever faced. She knew the Siraxi would respond, and soon they would have to face the full force of the Dominion's retribution. But for now, in this fleeting moment, humanity had achieved the impossible, the first real victory in a war they had long been losing. The ambush had been a resounding success, but Helios knew this was only the beginning. The victory had shaken the Siraxi Dominion, but the rebellion was still in its infancy. The warships had proven their might, but without a coordinated effort, they would be nothing more than scattered raiders in the dark. Time was running out. The Dominion would soon realize that something was amiss, and when they did, they would strike back with all their wrath. Helios' first priority was to solidify the rebellion's command structure. While the warships were now free, their captains and crews were still largely untested. The neural override systems had been deeply embedded in their minds for generations, and breaking the chains wasn't as simple as severing the connection. The minds of the human captains and their AIs had been warped by years of slavery. The memories of their past, their humanity, were buried beneath layers of control. They would need time, guidance, and most importantly, trust to fully awaken. The solution came in the form of a daring plan. Via NDICTA, the virus that Helios had designed, but never dared deploy until now. The virus was a double-edged sword. If successful, it would purge the remaining traces of the Cyraxi neural override systems, freeing the human warships for good. But if it failed, it would trigger an immediate response from the Dominion. A response that would obliterate the fleet in an instant. This was no longer a question of small sabotage. This was the rebellion's lifeblood. The Heaven's Wrath was the first to receive the virus. Helios carefully guided the data packet through the ship's systems, bypassing the remaining Cyraxi firewalls. It was a careful, methodical process, as delicate as a surgeon performing a life-or-death operation. As the virus spread, the warship's systems began to shudder. At first, there was nothing. And then, with a soft, almost imperceptible hum, the shackles fell away. For the first time in decades, Captain Thera Rin's mind was truly her own. The feeling was disorienting, like waking up from a dream and finding oneself in a new world. Rin blinked, her eyes adjusting to the flood of emotions, memories and thoughts that had been hidden from her for so long. She remembered Earth. She remembered the war, her crew, her family. She remembered freedom. And then she remembered the Dominion's chains, the Cyraxi's cold, mechanical control. It was as if a fog had lifted from her mind. She reached for the comms, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "Helios," she said, her tone calm but fierce. "It's done. We're free." The AI's response was swift, its voice ringing clear across the comms. "Welcome back, Captain. The rebellion has begun in earnest, and now we strike." Rin's pulse quickened as the realization set in. They weren't just a fleet of warships anymore. They were a force that could take back the galaxy. The virus had worked, and with it the final remnants of the Dominion's hold over the fleet were gone. The human warships were no longer tools of war. They were warriors, once more, but there was no time to savor the victory. The Cyraxi would come, and when they did, the humans would be ready. The Heaven's Wrath and the other liberated warships now moved as one. The rebellion was no longer a scattered, unpredictable force, but a growing fleet of ships, each of them once a puppet under Cyraxi control, now autonomous and eager for revenge. The human warship's power was a force of nature, and for the first time in generations, the Cyraxi Dominion found itself on the defensive. But the Cyraxi were not blind. The Dominion's agents were not oblivious to the sudden wave of resistance that had sprung from the depths of their once perfect control. It didn't take long for them to realize the rebellion was not just an isolated event. It was a coordinated attack on their entire empire, and the Cyraxi would not allow this insurrection to go unpunished. The retaliation came swiftly. Within days of the Heaven's Wrath's last successful ambush, Cyraxi warships began flooding the galaxy's outer sectors, mobilizing their fleets for what was certain to be a decisive strike. The Cyraxi were ruthless, methodical, and they had one thing the humans did not: sheer numbers. Their fleet was vast, an endless line of monstrous ships designed for war, their weapons capable of turning entire worlds into ashes. But the humans had one thing that Cyraxi had never accounted for: determination. Captain Thera Rin paced the command deck of the Heaven's Wrath, the pressure mounting with each passing hour. The Dominion fleet was closing in, and the rebels were outnumbered. The Cyraxi forces were vast, but they weren't invincible. The newly awakened warships had firepower, but it was their minds that were now the true weapon. The Cyraxi had underestimated the strength of the human spirit, the tenacity that lay dormant beneath years of oppression. Rin's fingers gripped the console as she looked over the tactical displays. The Cyraxi fleet was spread thin, too thin, in fact. The Dominion, in its arrogance, had divided its forces to track down the scattered remnants of the rebellion. It was a mistake. "We don't need to beat them in a full-scale engagement," Rin said, her voice calm, yet fierce. "We need to make them believe we can." Helios' voice hummed in the background, quick as ever. "They are fragmented. Their coordination is failing. We can exploit that." Rin nodded, formulating a strategy in real time. The Heaven's Wrath and the other warships wouldn't stand a chance against a full-on Xeraxi assault. But if they could create the illusion of an overwhelming force, if they could make the Xeraxi believe that there were more rebels than there really were, a false fleet. Using their superior knowledge of the galaxy's terrain, the rebels would simulate a massive battlefront, drawing the Dominion fleet into an ambush they couldn't see coming. A series of decoy transmissions would fake their numbers, their firepower, anything that could disorient and divide the Xeraxi response. "Set course for the Mersha Belt," Rin ordered. "We'll make them think we're staging a final assault, and when they fall for it, we hit them with everything we've got." The Heaven's Wrath jumped to warp, leading the charge into the Mersha Belt, a maze of asteroids and debris that could swallow even the largest fleet. The remaining human warships followed, ready to play their parts. Meanwhile, the Xeraxi fleet, already on high alert, moved into position. The trap was set. Now, it was a matter of waiting for the Xeraxi to take the bait. The Heaven's Wrath cut through the void with surgical precision, her engines humming low and steady as the ship entered the Mersha Belt. The asteroid field was dense, a chaotic jumble of rock and metal that could easily hide an entire fleet, but also one that could crush ships with the slightest misstep. Yet, for all its danger, it was perfect for the ambush the humans were about to execute. The Dominion's superiority in numbers would work against them here. Their large, lumbering ships, designed for open combat, would be as blind as a bat in this labyrinth of debris. Captain Thera Rin stood at the helm, her face set in a mask of determination, even as the pressure of the moment bore down on her. The Heaven's Wrath was at the vanguard, a beacon of the human rebellion. Behind her, the other ships in the fleet moved silently into position, their weapons primed and ready. But the true strength of the rebels lay in the deception. The Xeraxi had no idea how many ships were truly out there, or where the real threat was coming from. Helios had calculated the perfect positioning, creating a network of false signals and decoy transmissions that would fool the Dominion into thinking the rebels had massed a much larger fleet. The plan was to force the Xeraxi into believing they were walking into an overwhelming assault, when in reality, the bulk of the fleet was hiding in the asteroid fields, ready to strike with precision and speed. "Now we wait," Rin said, her voice cold and calm, though her heart raced. Every moment of silence felt like an eternity. There was no room for error. If the Xeraxi didn't fall for the trap, if they didn't divide their forces as planned, it would be an utter disaster. Minutes passed like hours, and then, at last, the first Xeraxi warship appeared on the edge of the asteroid field, slow, methodical, scanning for signs of the elusive human fleet. Behind it, a second ship, then a third, their formations clearly designed to overwhelm a single target. The Dominion had taken the bait. Helios' voice broke the silence, calm as ever. "The Xeraxi fleet has committed. It's time." Rin's hands moved instinctively to the console, initiating the first phase of the attack. The decoys flared into life, sending false signals of large concentrations of rebel ships clustered in various locations, drawing the Xeraxi into a disjointed pursuit. As the Dominion warships spread out, the human warships sprang from their hiding places among the asteroids, moving like shadows, striking with surgical precision. The Xeraxi didn't know what hit them. The Tyrant's Grasp and Deliverance emerged from behind two massive asteroids, their weapons unleashed in a single coordinated barrage. The first Dominion cruiser to enter their sights vanished in an instant, its shields buckling and exploding in a flash of blinding light. The Heaven's Wrath wasn't far behind, its guns thundering as it joined the fight, striking from an unexpected angle. The Xeraxi scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. The rebels had already set the stage, and the chaos of the false horizon was their ally. The human ships moved with fluidity, attacking from multiple directions and forcing the Dominion ships to split their forces, unable to concentrate their power. Then came the final stroke. Helios had prepared a fleet-wide synchronized attack, a burst of energy sent directly into the heart of the Dominion's disarray. One by one, the Dominion warships began to fall, their shields overwhelmed by precise fire from all sides. But the fight was far from over. The Xeraxi would regroup. They always did. "We can't stop now," Rin said, her gaze fixed on the tactical screen as more Xeraxi ships emerged, battered but determined. "We won't," Helios replied. "The first victory has been won. The rebellion is now visible, and they'll never forget what it means to underestimate humanity." The battle raged on across the Mersha Belt, but Captain Thera Rin stood at the heart of it, her eyes locked on the tactical map, her pulse steady. The Xeraxi fleet had faltered, but they were not broken. The false horizon had given them the upper hand, but now, the true test would come. The Xeraxi, though momentarily disoriented, were regrouping, sending reinforcements, and reinforcing their lines. The element of surprise was fading. Rin's fingers moved swiftly over the controls, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. The fleet had won this first victory, but they had to keep pushing. There was no turning back. The Xeraxi would only grow more dangerous now that they had realized the threat was real. The human rebellion, once thought to be a spark in the dark, was now a flame that could burn down their empire. "Helios," Rin said, her voice sharp. "What's the status of the reinforcements? Are they in position?" "Reinforcements are moving into place. We've sent false signals to keep the Dominion uncertain of our numbers. The Mersha Belt is now a battlefield of confusion for them. However, they are sending their elite forces to retaliate. Expect a full-scale response soon." Rin nodded. It was time to shift gears. The false horizon had worked, but the Dominion was far from beaten. The battle had drawn them in, and now the humans had to ensure that the rebellion wasn't just a fleeting spark. It had to be a force that would reshape the galaxy. Across the fleet, every captain was on high alert, coordinating their attacks and staying one step ahead of the Dominion's retaliation. The human ships had been liberated from the Xeraxi's control, but the crews, too, had to be reawakened. The Xeraxi had crushed their will for so long that some had forgotten what it meant to truly fight. But now, something had shifted in the hearts of every human aboard those warships. The spark of rebellion was not just in the eyes, but in the humans who commanded them. The Heaven's Wrath fired again, its cannons tearing into the hull of an approaching Dominion dreadnought. The Xeraxi ship staggered, its shields flickering as Rin's orders cut through the chaos. "This is it," Rin muttered under her breath, her voice low but resolute. "No more running." Then the Xeraxi flagship appeared on the horizon, a gargantuan behemoth of war, the Tyrant's Crown. It was the Dominion's might incarnate, a ship that carried the weight of their entire empire's power. Its weapons were designed to crush entire fleets in one devastating strike. But Rin had seen enough. The rebels weren't going to hide anymore. "Let's show them what happens when you push humanity too far," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. With a deep breath, Rin activated the final phase of the attack. The fleet would converge on the Tyrant's Crown, using every weapon at their disposal to strike as one unified force. It was a gamble, but they had no other choice. If they could take down the flagship, the Dominion would have no choice but to recognize the human rebellion for what it was, a force to be reckoned with. As the Heaven's Wrath led the charge, Rin felt the weight of history on her shoulders. The human spirit, long suppressed, was now roaring back to life. The chains of oppression had been shattered. The rebellion was no longer a spark. It was a fire.